She went to the hospital to donate her blood, thinking her husband's life depended on it, but he coldly handed her divorce papers saying, "I can't stand with you anymore," even though he was perfectly fine. Unbeknownst to him, her blood was a rare type, exactly what a critically ill woman actually needed elsewhere. The hospital recorded her details, triggering a match her billionaire parents had been searching for 30 years. The woman he tried to destroy wasn't just anyone. She was the lost heir to a billionaire empire, and he had no idea. "Hi, my beautiful family, may the Almighty crown every woman with unmatched strength, unshakable dignity, and a heart so pure it inspires everyone around her. May your homes overflow with peace, your days be wrapped in blessings, and your souls shine brighter than the stars. May every challenge lift you higher, every tear transform into courage, and may your spirit always feel honored, cherished, and loved. You are the pillars of this family, the light that carries us through the darkest times, and the heartbeat that makes life meaningful. May health, love, and endless happiness follow you always, and may you walk in His protection every single moment if your heart is true, like the video. If your love is real, right, I am with Mr. Peter." The hospital corridor smelled like antiseptic and broken promises. Holly Peters clutched the blood donation consent form so tightly that her knuckles ached. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the terror squeezing her chest. Mount Sinai's private wing gleamed with the kind of sterile perfection that money bought. Each room a monument to privilege she'd never quite belonged to, despite wearing the Deland name for 3 years. She'd gotten the call 2 hours ago. Michael had been in a boating accident. He needed blood, rare type. The nurse's voice had been clinical, detached, but Holly heard the urgency underneath. Her husband was hurt, and for once she could actually help him. For once, her body could give him something his wealth and connections couldn't simply purchase. Maybe this would finally prove her worth. The thought made her hate herself a little, but she couldn't stop it. 3 years of marriage had taught her that worth in the Deland family was measured in bloodlines and bank accounts, and she'd come up devastatingly short on both counts. She was the charity case Michael had married in what his mother Constance called a moment of misguided compassion. The hospital aide who caught his attention during a routine procedure, who believed in fairy tales enough to think love could bridge the gap between their worlds. How spectacularly wrong she'd been. Holly paused outside the door to Michael's suite, smoothing down her discount department store dress that suddenly felt even cheaper against the opulence surrounding her. Through the small window, she could see movement inside. Michael wasn't alone. Her stomach dropped when she recognized the rigid posture of her mother-in-law standing by the window like a sentinel guarding against contamination. She should have known. Constance would be here, taking a breath that tasted like failure and determination in equal measure. Holly pushed open the door. The scene that greeted her was worse than any nightmare her anxiety had conjured. Michael sat propped up in the hospital bed, his arm bandaged, but his expression utterly intact and cold. A man in an expensive suit stood beside him, briefcase open on the rolling table, and Constance turned from the window with a smile that could cut glass. "Oh," Constance said, managing to inject oceans of disdain into that single syllable. "You actually came." Holly's grip on the consent form tightened. "The hospital called. They said Michael needed blood, and we have the same type. I came as soon as I could." Michael finally looked at her, and the absence of warmth in his eyes made her want to disappear. This was the man who'd once held her hand on rainy Sunday mornings, who'd promised her that their love was bigger than his family's objections. But that man had died slowly over 3 years, suffocated by his mother's constant disapproval and his own growing resentment at having married beneath his station. Holly. Her name came out flat, emotionless, like he was reading from a script he'd rehearsed. "We need to talk." The man in the suit cleared his throat. "Mrs. Deland, I'm Robert Ashford, Mr. Deland's attorney. Perhaps you should sit down." Something cold slithered down Holly's spine. "I don't understand." "I'm here to donate blood. The nurse said it was urgent. Constance's laugh was crystalline and cruel. Urgent? Oh, you misunderstood, dear. We already have arrangements for Michael's transfusion through our private physician network. Did you honestly believe we would allow your blood anywhere near my son? The words hit Holly like physical blows. She looked at Michael, searching for contradiction, for defense, for anything that resembled the man she'd married. He wouldn't meet her eyes. Michael? Her voice cracked despite her determination to stay strong. What's happening? He finally looked at her then, and what she saw in his face destroyed the last fragile hope she'd been clinging to. Not anger, not even hatred, just exhaustion, as if being married to her had drained something essential from him. I'm filing for divorce, Holly. Robert has the papers. The room tilted. Holly gripped the back of a chair to keep from falling. You're divorcing me now, while you're in the hospital. The accident made things clear, Michael said, his voice gaining strength as if he'd been holding this speech inside for months. Life is short. I don't want to waste any more of mine pretending this marriage was anything other than a mistake. Constance moved closer, her perfume overwhelming in its expensiveness. Honestly, dear, you must have seen this coming. You never fit into our world. The country club wives laugh about you behind your back. The staff pities you. Even Michael's business associates ask him why he's still married to the help. I'm not the help. Holly forced the words through a throat tight with unshed tears. I'm your daughter-in-law. I'm his wife. You were a momentary lapse in judgment, Constance said, examining her manicured nails. Michael confused gratitude with love, novelty with compatibility. But reality has a way of asserting itself, doesn't it? You're simply not equipped to be a Deland. Robert Ashford pulled papers from his briefcase, his discomfort visible, but not enough to stop him from doing his job. Mrs. Deland, these are divorce papers. Mr. Deland is offering you a settlement of $50,000, which is extraordinarily generous considering the brevity of the marriage and the absence of any significant joint assets. Generous? Holly repeated, the word tasting like poison. She looked at Michael, really looked at him, searching for any remnant of the man who'd courted her with such seeming sincerity. We made vows. You promised me forever. Michael's jaw tightened. I promised a lot of things I shouldn't have. I can't stand with you anymore, Holly. I can't stand being married to someone who reminds me every single day that I settled, that I let my heart overrule my head and tied myself to someone who doesn't belong in my life. The cruelty of it stole her breath. She'd known their marriage was struggling. She'd felt the distance growing between them, the way he flinched when she spoke at dinner parties, the shame in his eyes when his friends made subtle digs about their mismatched union. But hearing him say it, hearing him reduce 3 years to a mistake he needed to correct, shattered something inside her. Sign the papers. Holly, Constance said, her voice almost gentle now, which somehow made it worse. Take the money. Start over somewhere far away from here. Find someone from your own background, your own level. You'll be happier, and so will Michael. Holly looked down at the papers Robert extended toward her. $50,000. A price tag on 3 years of trying to be enough, of shrinking herself to fit into spaces that were never meant for her, of enduring whispered insults and outright rejection while clinging to the belief that love would eventually win. She thought about refusing. She thought about fighting. But then she saw Michael's face, saw the relief already creeping into his expression at the prospect of being free from her, and she realized the most devastating truth of all. He wanted her gone. This wasn't salvageable. This had never been real. Do you have a pen? Her voice came out steady, and she was proud of that small victory. Robert handed her one, expensive and heavy. Holly signed her name on every marked line, watching her marriage dissolve with each stroke of ink. When she finished, she handed the papers back and met Michael's eyes one final time. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, she said quietly. I hope it makes you happier than I could. She turned and walked toward the door, her spine straight despite the devastation coursing through her. But as she reached for the handle, Constance's voice stopped her. Oh, and Holly, Do try not to embarrass yourself by telling people what happened. It reflects poorly on all of us." Holly left without responding, but tears finally spilled down her cheeks as she stumbled back into the sterile corridor. She made it to the elevator before the sobs came, before her body started shaking with the force of her grief. The elevator doors opened on the ground floor, and she walked blindly toward the exit, desperate to escape this place of humiliation and heartbreak. "Mrs. Deland?" A young woman in scrubs touched her arm gently. Holly blinked through her tears at the kind face of a nurse she didn't recognize. "I'm sorry," Holly managed. "I'm fine. I just need to leave." The nurse's expression filled with concern. "I saw your name on the blood donor list. We still have your consent form on file. I know this is terrible timing, but there's a patient in critical condition upstairs who desperately needs your blood type. It's extremely rare, and she's running out of time." Holly wanted to say no. She wanted to tell this nurse that she'd given enough today, that she had nothing left to offer anyone. But she looked at this stranger's hopeful face and thought about a woman dying upstairs who had nothing to do with the Delands or their cruelty. "Yes," Holly whispered. "I'll donate." The nurse's relief was palpable. "Thank you so much. Follow me, please. I'll take you to the donation center." As Holly followed the nurse down a different corridor, she didn't know that this single act of compassion would trigger events that would shatter every assumption about who she was. She didn't know that the blood flowing through her veins carried secrets that would change her entire world. She didn't know that by saving a stranger's life, she was about to discover her own. All she knew was that Michael Deland had thrown her away like she was worthless. But Holly Peters had never needed his validation to have value. She just hadn't remembered that yet. The nurse led her to a bright donation room and helped her settle into the chair. As Holly watched her blood begin flowing through the tubes, the nurse smiled at her. "The patient you're helping is someone very special. You're literally saving her life today." Holly closed her eyes, exhausted and heartbroken, but somehow still here, still breathing, still capable of helping someone even in her darkest moment. Maybe that was worth something. Maybe that was everything. "I need to update our donor database," the nurse said, pulling out a tablet. "We're implementing a new system that tracks DNA markers for rare blood types. Would you mind providing a cheek swab? It helps us match donors with patients more efficiently in the future." Holly nodded, too drained to question or refuse. She let the nurse swab her cheek, watched her seal it in a small container, and felt nothing except the strange emptiness of a woman who just lost everything she thought mattered. What Holly didn't know was that this sample would be entered into a medical database that connected with missing persons registries. She didn't know that somewhere in the city, a wealthy couple had been monitoring these databases for 3 decades, searching desperately for any trace of a daughter stolen from them. She didn't know that her DNA was about to light up their world like a beacon in the darkness. She didn't know that the woman whose life she was saving had been searching for her too. Holly Peters sat in that donation chair believing she was nobody, worth nothing, deserving of the rejection she'd just endured. But the blood flowing from her veins was about to prove otherwise, revealing truths that would transform not just her future, but her entire understanding of who she'd always been. Sometimes salvation comes disguised as devastation. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what was yours all along. And sometimes the worst day of your life is actually the beginning of something extraordinary. Chapter 2. The Woman She Saved. 2 weeks felt like 2 lifetimes. Holly's new studio apartment in Brooklyn had peeling wallpaper and a radiator that clanked like it was harboring ghosts. But it was hers. $50,000 didn't stretch as far as she'd imagined, not after deposits and furniture, and the crushing realization that starting over meant buying everything from dish soap to hope. She'd returned to the community health clinic, where she'd worked before Michael swept her into his world of country clubs and condescension. Her co-worker Tamara brought her soup every lunch break and listened to her, cry in the staff bathroom without judgment. That man was a parasite in expensive shoes, Tamara said, handing Holly another tissue. You're better off eating ramen in freedom than caviar in a cage. Holly wanted to believe her, but the shame burned hotter than grief. She'd failed at being a wife, failed at fitting into Michael's world, failed at the one thing society told her mattered. The whispers from the Dayland social circle had already started circulating. Poor Holly, such a tragedy. Did you hear she signed the papers without even fighting? Maybe she knew she didn't deserve him. The clinic receptionist interrupted her spiral of self-pity one afternoon, poking her head into the file room where Holly was updating patient records. Someone's asking for you. Says it's personal. Holly's stomach clenched. Michael wouldn't come here. Constance certainly wouldn't. She walked to the consultation room and froze when she saw the woman sitting there. Elegant didn't begin to describe her. She wore wealth the way other people wore skin, natural and effortless. Her jewelry was understated but clearly expensive, her posture perfect, her face both regal and warm. But it was her eyes that stopped Holly's breath. They were brimming with tears. The woman stood immediately. You're Holly Peters. Yes, Holly's voice came out uncertain. I'm sorry, do we know each other? We do now, the woman's voice broke. My name is Lydia Montgomery. 2 weeks ago, I was dying in Mount Sinai Hospital from complications after surgery. My blood type is so rare that they couldn't find a donor. The doctors told my husband to call our family to say goodbye. Holly's memory flashed to that terrible day, to the nurse asking her to donate after Michael had destroyed her. And then you walked in, Lydia continued, tears spilling down her perfect cheekbones. You'd just been through something devastating. The nurses told me later that you were crying, that your world had just collapsed. But you still chose to save a stranger. You gave me my life back when yours was falling apart. Holly felt emotion lodge in her throat. I just did what anyone would do. No, Lydia stepped closer. Most people drowning in their own pain can't see past it. But you could. You chose compassion over bitterness. That's rare. That's precious. They sat down. And somehow Holly found herself talking to this stranger with an ease she'd never felt with the Dayland wives. Lydia listened like every word mattered, asked questions that showed genuine interest, and shared pieces of her own story. She'd built a life with her husband Vincent after unimaginable loss, she said. They'd learned that surviving tragedy meant choosing to help others survive theirs. When Lydia finally left, she hugged Holly like they were family. Thank you for my life. I mean that. Please let me stay in touch. 3 days later, orchids arrived at the clinic. Massive, expensive, beautiful orchids that made the whole staff stop and stare. The card read, "You gave me everything. Let me give you friendship." Lydia. Tamara whistled low. Girl, do you know who Lydia Montgomery is? Her family practically owns Manhattan, and she wants to be your friend. Holly stared at the flowers, feeling something stir inside her that she'd thought Michael had killed. Maybe she wasn't worthless. Maybe one person's rejection didn't define her value. Maybe saving a life mattered more than being the perfect society wife. That evening, her phone rang. Unknown number. Holly almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Miss Peters, my name is Gerald Whitmore. I'm an attorney with Whitmore and Associates. I need to meet with you urgently regarding a matter of extraordinary family importance. Holly's exhaustion transformed to wariness. If this is about the divorce, everything's already settled. This has nothing to do with your divorce. Gerald's voice carried weight. This is about who you are, who you've always been. Please, Ms. Peters, this meeting will change your life. The words sent chills down her spine. What are you talking about? I can't discuss this over the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow? I promise you, this is worth your time. Against every instinct screaming caution, Holly agreed. Because deep down, in the part of her that had spent 27 years wondering why she'd been abandoned at a fire station, she needed to know what this stranger knew about her. That night, Holly dreamed of a little girl standing in a park, holding someone's hand, feeling safe and loved. She woke with tears on her face and a feeling she couldn't name pressing against her ribs like a fist. The next morning, she dressed carefully in her best outfit and took the subway to Manhattan. The coffee shop Gerald suggested was quiet, upscale, the kind of place where conversations could be private. He was already there when she arrived, a distinguished man in his 60s, with kind eyes and a briefcase that looked serious. "Ms. Peters, thank you for coming." He gestured to the seat across from him. "I know this is strange. Please let me explain everything before you react." Holly sat, her hands shaking slightly. Gerald ordered them coffee, then opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder that looked like it contained answers to questions she'd been asking her whole life. "What I'm about to tell you sounds impossible," Gerald said carefully. "But every word is true, verified by science and confirmed by evidence. Miss Peters, you're not who you think you are." Holly's throat went dry. "What does that mean?" Gerald pulled out photographs. Old photographs, a little girl with Holly's eyes, Holly's smile, Holly's face, a birthday party with balloons and cake, and two people looking at the child with absolute adoration. 30 years ago, Vincent and Lydia Montgomery's 3-year-old daughter was kidnapped from Central Park. Her name was Hannah. The kidnapper was never caught. Hannah was never found. The Montgomerys spent 3 decades searching, never giving up hope. Holly stared at the photographs, her heart hammering. "Why are you showing me this?" Gerald slid medical documents across the table. DNA analysis, genetic markers, results that screamed truth in black and white percentages. When you donated blood to save Lydia's life, the hospital ran genetic markers as part of their rare blood type database. Those markers flagged in a missing persons registry the Montgomerys have maintained since Hannah disappeared. "We ran comprehensive DNA testing. Miss Peters, you are Hannah Montgomery. You are their daughter." The coffee shop tilted. Holly gripped the table's edge, her vision swimming. "That's impossible. I would remember. I would know. Childhood trauma causes memory loss. When you were found at that fire station, you couldn't speak, couldn't tell anyone your name or where you came from. The woman who kidnapped you died in a car accident, and you were left with nothing except blank spaces where your first 3 years should be." Holly looked at the DNA results, at the photographs, at her own face staring back at her from 30 years ago. She thought about Lydia's tears, about the strange familiarity she'd felt, about feeling like she belonged somewhere for the first time in her life. "Lydia knows," she whispered. "She suspected the moment she met you. The resemblance to her own mother is striking, but she wanted scientific confirmation before saying anything. She didn't want to give you false hope if we were wrong." Tears streamed down Holly's face. "I've spent my whole life feeling lost, feeling like I didn't belong anywhere, like I was nobody." Gerald's voice gentled. "You were never nobody, Hannah. You were stolen from people who loved you desperately, and they never stopped looking, never stopped hoping. And now, against all odds, you've come home." Holly thought about Michael telling her she didn't fit in his world, but maybe she'd been trying to fit into the wrong world all along. Maybe she had a real world waiting for her, one where she actually belonged. "What happens now?" she asked. "The Montgomerys want to meet you, officially as their daughter. They understand this is overwhelming, and they have no expectations. But they've waited 30 years to find you, and they'd like the chance to know you." Holly nodded, unable to speak past the emotion choking her. Gerald pulled out one more document. "There's something else you should know. The Montgomery family fortune is valued at $3 billion. As their only child, you're the heir to everything they've built." The words didn't even register. Holly didn't care about money. She cared about the photographs of a little girl who'd been loved, who'd been wanted, who'd mattered to people before she was stolen away. She cared about finding answers to questions that had haunted her entire life. She cared about finally belonging somewhere. Chapter 3, The Daughter Who Came Home. The Montgomery estate looked like something from a movie about people who shaped the world with their decisions. Holly stood in the circular driveway, her discount store purse clutched in shaking hands, staring at the mansion that supposedly connected to her past. 3 stories of elegant stone and windows that reflected clouds like they owned the sky. Manicured gardens that probably cost more to maintain than her entire year's salary. Staff members moving efficiently in the background, making everything perfect. Gerald touched her elbow gently. "Ready?" Holly wasn't. She'd never be ready for this. But she nodded anyway. The front door opened before they reached it, and there stood Vincent Montgomery. Distinguished, silver-haired, powerful in the way men who built empires were powerful. But his eyes were Holly's eyes, and when he saw her, his entire face crumbled. "Hannah," he breathed, and the name sounded like a prayer. Lydia appeared behind him, and the composure she'd shown at the clinic shattered. She rushed forward and wrapped her arms around Holly, sobbing into her shoulder. My baby girl. We never stopped looking. We never stopped loving you." Holly stood frozen, overwhelmed by their emotion, by the physical evidence of being wanted. Vincent joined the embrace, and for the first time in her life, Holly felt what it meant to be someone's entire world. They brought her inside to a sitting room that overlooked the gardens. Pictures covered every surface. Pictures of Holly as a toddler, laughing and playing and being adored. Video screens showed footage of her 3rd birthday party, of her taking her first steps, of moments she had no memory of, but that had clearly been treasured. "We've kept everything," Lydia said, her voice thick. "Your nursery is exactly as it was. Your toys, your clothes, your books, everything is still there waiting for you." Vincent pulled out photo albums, decades worth of documentation. "We hired investigators. We worked with police. We created foundations to help find other missing children. Every lead, every possibility, we followed them all." Holly touched the photographs, trying to find herself in this child who'd been so loved. "What happened? How was I taken?" The pain that crossed their faces was immediate and visceral. "Our nanny," Vincent said quietly. "Margaret. She'd been with us for a year. We trusted her completely. We didn't know she'd lost her own daughter in a custody battle and had experienced a complete psychological break." Lydia's hands trembled. "She took you to the park one afternoon. Normal routine, but she never brought you back. She changed your appearance, your name, everything. Moved across the country with you. And then, 6 months later, she died in that car accident, leaving you alone at a fire station with no identification and no memory of us," Vincent finished, his voice breaking. "We searched for you for years before the trail went cold. But we never stopped monitoring databases, DNA registries, missing persons reports. We couldn't let go." Holly felt tears sliding down her face. "I grew up in foster care. I moved between 8 different homes. I always felt like I didn't belong anywhere, like something was missing." "We were missing," Lydia said, taking Holly's hands. "You were missing. And now you're here, and I know this is overwhelming, but we want you to know something. You don't have to be anyone you're not. You don't have to suddenly feel like our daughter. We just want the chance to know you, whoever you are now." They talked for hours. Vincent told her about the business he'd built, partly as a distraction from grief, partly to create something meaningful from tragedy. Lydia showed her the foundation they'd started in Hannah's name, the hundreds of missing children they'd helped reunite with families. "We turned our pain into purpose," Lydia explained. "We couldn't save you, so we saved everyone we could." As evening fell, Lydia walked Holly through the house. She opened a door on the 2nd floor, and Holly stepped into a room preserved in time. A nursery decorated in soft yellows and greens, filled with toys and books and love. A rocking chair by the window where someone had spent hours holding a child. A mobile hanging over a crib, stars and moons turning slowly in the air current. "This was your room," Lydia whispered. "I used to rock you to sleep every night. You loved when I sang to you." Holly touched the crib railing, and something flickered in her memory. Not visual, not clear, but emotional. A feeling of safety, of being held, of being cherished. She'd spent her whole life chasing that feeling without knowing what it was or where it came from. "Stay with us," Vincent said from the doorway. Please, we have guest suites, or we can set up this room however you'd like. But stay. Let us have time with you." Holly thought about her cramped Brooklyn apartment, about going back to a life that suddenly felt like a costume she'd been wearing. She thought about Michael throwing her away, about Constance telling her she didn't belong. But here, in this room, where she'd been loved before she could remember, Holly felt something settle inside her. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." The next few weeks transformed Holly's entire understanding of reality. She moved into a guest suite that was bigger than any apartment she'd lived in. She met extended Montgomery family members who welcomed her with tears and celebration. Aunts and uncles and cousins who'd mourned her loss and now rejoiced in her return. Vincent and Lydia gave her space but also presence, letting her adjust at her own pace. They asked about her life, her struggles, her dreams. They listened without judgment when she told them about Michael and the divorce, about feeling worthless and rejected. "That man is an idiot," Vincent said firmly. "He had something precious and couldn't recognize its value. That's his failure, not yours." Lydia held her while she cried about all the years she'd spent feeling unwanted. "You were wanted every single day. We wanted you. We loved you. We searched for you." That never stopped. Holly learned about the family business, about properties and investments, and philanthropic work. Vincent insisted she take a position in the company, not as decoration, but as genuine partnership. "You're brilliant, Hannah. We've seen your work ethic, your compassion, your intelligence. You built yourself from nothing because you had to. Imagine what you can build with resources and support." Holly started attending board meetings, learning strategy and operations. She discovered she had aptitude for seeing patterns, for identifying problems, for solving complex situations with creative solutions. But more than that, she discovered the Montgomerys had values. They didn't exploit people. They treated employees well. They refused partnerships with companies that had ethical violations. During one meeting, a proposal crossed Holly's desk. Land Industries wanted backing for a development project. Her heart stopped when she saw Michael's name on the documents. Vincent noticed her reaction. "What is it?" Holly stared at the proposal, at her ex-husband's company, begging for help from a family that didn't know their connection yet. An idea formed, dark and satisfying. "I think we should hear this proposal in person," Holly said carefully, "before making any decisions." Vincent studied her face, then nodded slowly. "Agreed. Schedule a presentation meeting." Holly felt something shift inside her. The woman Michael had thrown away was about to show him exactly what he'd lost. Chapter 4, The Investigation Begins. Holly couldn't sleep the night after scheduling the Land Industries meeting. She lay in the massive guest suite bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with possibilities. Part of her wanted simple revenge, wanted to watch Michael's face when he realized who she'd become. But another part of her, the part that had grown stronger over the past month with the Montgomerys, wanted something deeper than just humiliation. She wanted truth. At 3 a.m, Holly gave up on sleep and went down to the estate's library. The room was 2 stories tall, filled with leather-bound books and the kind of furniture that had been in families for generations. She found Vincent there, reading by lamplight. "Can't sleep either?" he asked gently. Holly sat across from him. "I keep thinking about the meeting, about seeing Michael again. I don't know what I want from it." Vincent closed his book and studied her face. "What do you know about Land Industries? Beyond your personal connection?" "Not much. Michael never really talked about the business with me. I was just decoration at company events." Vincent stood and walked to his desk, pulling out a file. "After you suggested the meeting, I had our team do some preliminary research. Just basic information gathering." He handed her the folder. "Hannah, I think you should see this." Holly opened the file and started reading. What she found made her stomach turn. Building code violations that had been mysteriously dismissed. Worker complaints that had disappeared from public records. A pattern of cutting corners that went back years. "This is who Michael's family really are?" Holly asked, her voice hollow. This is their business practices, Vincent said carefully. Whether they're aware of all of it or deliberately orchestrating it, I can't say. But it's troubling, Holly kept reading. 3 workers had been injured on Deland projects in the past 2 years. All 3 cases had been settled quietly with non-disclosure agreements. Medical bills that should have been covered by workers' compensation had somehow fallen on the injured parties. They hurt people, Holly whispered. They're hurting people and hiding it. Vincent sat back down across from her. Now you have a decision to make, Hannah. Do you want to proceed with this meeting? Because once we start down this path, once we start asking questions publicly, there will be consequences. Holly thought about the housekeepers at the Deland mansion, the ones Constance had berated constantly. She thought about the catering staff at parties, treated like furniture. She thought about how that family had treated her and realized it wasn't personal. They treated everyone without wealth or power as disposable. I want to proceed, Holly said firmly, but not for revenge, for accountability. If they're hurting people, they need to be stopped. Vincent smiled with unmistakable pride. Then we'll need to investigate thoroughly before the meeting. We'll need evidence, not just suspicions. Over the next 2 weeks, Holly threw herself into researching Deland Industries. She worked with Montgomery Properties' legal team, reviewing public records, tracking down former employees who'd been willing to talk, building a comprehensive picture of the company's practices. What she discovered was worse than she'd imagined. Deland Industries had been systematically underpaying workers, often finding technicalities to avoid paying final wages. They'd used substandard materials on multiple projects, materials that met minimum legal requirements but were known in the industry to deteriorate faster. They'd falsified safety inspection reports, bribing inspectors to overlook violations. And through it all, Michael had signed off on everything. His signature was on the contracts, on the payment authorizations, on the inspection reports. He'd known. He'd always known. Holly sat in the Montgomery Properties conference room one afternoon, surrounded by documents, when Lydia found her. "You've been working yourself to exhaustion," Lydia said gently. "Come take a break." Holly looked up with eyes red from reading. "Did you know that workers on Deland projects are injured at 3 times the rate of industry average? 3 times, and nobody's done anything about it because the Delands make the problems disappear with money and connections." Lydia sat beside her. "This is affecting you deeply." "They treated me like garbage," Holly said, her voice breaking. "They made me feel worthless for 3 years, and I thought it was personal, that there was something wrong with me. But it wasn't personal at all. They treat everyone this way. Anyone without power is just a means to an end." Lydia took Holly's hand. "So what are you going to do about it?" Holly looked at her mother, at this woman who'd spent 30 years turning grief into purpose, turning loss into a mission to help others. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth. I'm going to use every advantage I have to hold them accountable. Even knowing it will be painful. Even knowing you'll have to face Michael and relive some of your worst memories." Holly met Lydia's eyes, especially because of that, because I know what it feels like to be powerless against them. And now I'm not powerless anymore. The night before the scheduled meeting, Holly stood in front of her closet, choosing what to wear. She'd bought several designer outfits over the past weeks, clothes that fit perfectly and cost more than her monthly rent used to be. But this wasn't just about looking expensive. This was about armor. She chose a slate grey suit from an Italian designer, paired with a silk blouse the color of deep water. Simple, elegant, powerful. She practiced her expressions in the mirror, finding the perfect balance between polite professionalism and absolute confidence. Her phone buzzed. Tamara was video calling. "Show me the outfit," Tamara demanded immediately. Holly stepped back so Tamara could see the full effect. "Girl, you'd look like you could buy and sell his entire company before breakfast," Tamara said, with satisfaction. "He's going to die when he sees you." "That's not the goal," Holly said, but she couldn't help smiling. "Maybe not, but it's going to be a glorious side effect." Tamara's expression grew serious. "Are you ready for this?" "Really ready?" Holly thought about the question. "I don't know if anyone can be ready to face the person who made them feel worthless. But I'm not that person anymore. I'm not going into that room as Holly Peters, who needed his approval. I'm going as Hannah Montgomery, who knows exactly what she's worth." "Damn right you are," Tamara said fiercely. "And if he even breathes wrong in your direction, you have my full permission to destroy him." After they hung up, Holly lay in bed, staring at the ceiling again. Tomorrow, Michael would walk into that boardroom expecting a routine business presentation. He had no idea his ex-wife was now a principal board member of the company he was pitching to. He had no idea that she knew everything about his company's practices. He had no idea that the woman he'd thrown away was about to become the most powerful person in his professional life. Holly finally fell asleep with a small smile on her face. Tomorrow was going to change everything. Chapter 5. The Boardroom Confrontation. Holly arrived at Montgomery Properties at 7 in the morning, 3 hours before the Deland Industries presentation was scheduled to begin. She needed time to prepare, not just physically, but mentally. She went straight to the executive bathroom and took her time with her appearance. Hair styled in a sleek updo that showed off her bone structure. Makeup applied with precision, emphasizing her eyes and giving her an air of authority. The slate grey suit fit like it had been made for her, which it had been. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Gone was Holly Peters, the hospital aide who'd believed she was lucky to be loved by Michael DeLand. In her place stood Hannah Montgomery, heiress to a $3 billion fortune, board member of one of Manhattan's most powerful companies, and someone who absolutely belonged in this world. Vincent found her in the boardroom at 8:30, reviewing documents one final time. "You don't have to do this," he said gently. "We can reject their proposal based on the evidence we've gathered. You don't have to face him." Holly looked up from the financial report she'd been studying. "Yes, I do. Because if I don't face him now, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have. I need to do this, not just for me, but for every person he and his family have stepped on." "Then I'll be right beside you," Vincent promised. "He won't intimidate you. He won't make you feel small. And if he tries, he'll answer to me." At 9:15, the other board members began arriving. They knew about Holly's connection to Deland Industries. Vincent had briefed them, but they'd agreed to let Holly handle the meeting as she saw fit. They were there to support her and to evaluate the proposal objectively, but this was her moment. Holly positioned herself at the far end of the conference table. Not at the head, that was Vincent's seat, but in a position where she'd be the last person Michael would see when he entered. She wanted that moment of recognition, that instant when his comfortable world shattered. At 9:55, the receptionist called. "The Deland Industries team is here." "Send them in," Vincent said calmly. Holly's heart hammered against her ribs, but outwardly she appeared perfectly composed. She reviewed the document in front of her, giving the impression of someone thoroughly engrossed in work. Too important to be interrupted by arrivals. The conference room door opened. Michael walked in first, and Holly's breath caught, despite her preparation. He looked exactly the same, confident and polished in his expensive suit. His hair was perfectly styled, his smile practiced and charming. He carried himself like a man who'd never questioned his right to be in any room. Behind him, Constance glided in wearing Chanel and an expression of supreme entitlement. Neither of them looked in Holly's direction. They were too focused on Vincent, on making their crucial first impression with the man they believed held their future in his hands. "Mr. Montgomery," Michael said warmly, extending his hand. "Thank you so much for agreeing to this meeting. I'm Michael DeLand, and this is my mother, Constance, who serves as our operations consultant." Vincent shook Michael's hand with cool politeness. "Mr. DeLand, Mrs. DeLand, please have a seat. Let me introduce our board members." He went around the table, introducing each person by name and title. Michael and Constance nodded politely at each one, their attention primarily on Vincent as the obvious power center. Then Vincent reached Holly's end of the table. "And this is Miss Hannah Montgomery, principal board member and my daughter." Holly looked up from her document for the first time. Meeting Michael's eyes directly, for a moment the entire room seemed to freeze. Michael's face went through a rapid series of expressions: confusion, recognition, shock, disbelief, and finally something that looked like panic. His mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Constance, who'd been scanning the other board members with polite disinterest, snapped her attention to Holly. Her eyes widened, and 2 spots of color appeared high on her cheekbones, the only crack in her composed facade. "Holly!" Michael's voice came out uncertain, stripped of all its earlier confidence. Holly smiled, and it was nothing like the nervous, eager-to-please smile she'd given him during their marriage. This smile was pure controlled power. "Mr. Deland, though in a professional setting, I believe we should maintain appropriate formalities. My name is Ms. Montgomery." She watched him struggle to process the information. Holly Peters, his ex-wife, the woman from nothing, the charity case, was sitting at the end of this conference table, looking like she owned the building, which Holly realized with dark satisfaction she technically partially did. "I don't understand," Michael said, looking between Holly and Vincent. "What are you doing here?" Vincent's voice cut through the confusion like ice. "Miss Montgomery is a principal board member of this company and holds significant decision-making authority over all partnerships and investments. She's here because every major business proposal comes through her for evaluation. Now, shall we begin your presentation? I believe we've scheduled an hour for you to make your case." Michael looked like he'd been physically struck. Constance had gone pale beneath her expertly applied makeup, her mind clearly racing through the implications of this revelation. "Perhaps we should reschedule," Constance said quickly. "It seems there might be a conflict of interest given your history with our family." Holly spoke for the first time since acknowledging Michael, her voice steady and professional. "There's no conflict of interest, Mrs. Deland. My personal history with your family has no bearing on Montgomery Properties' business decisions. We evaluate all proposals based on merit, ethical practices, and potential value to our company. If your proposal is sound, it will be considered fairly." She let that sink in, watched Constance understand the subtext. If your proposal isn't sound, no amount of personal connection or social maneuvering will save you. Michael had recovered some of his composure, though sweat was beginning to show at his temples. "Of course, we're prepared to present." He moved to the head of the table where the presentation screen was set up, his hands shaking slightly as he connected his laptop. Holly watched him fumble with the cables. This man who'd always seemed so confident and in control. She felt no pleasure in his discomfort, just a cold clarity about who he really was, someone whose confidence came from never being challenged, whose authority came from inherited privilege rather than earned respect. The presentation began. Michael talked about development opportunities, about projected returns, about prime locations Deland Industries had secured for potential projects. His voice gained strength as he moved through familiar material, falling back on the pitch he'd clearly practiced extensively. Holly let him talk for 10 minutes before asking her first question. "Mr. Deland, can you speak to your company's safety record on previous projects?" Michael's rhythm faltered. "We maintain all required safety standards and comply with relevant regulations." "That's not what I asked," Holly said calmly. "I asked about your safety record. Specifically, how does your injury rate compare to industry averages?" The room had gone very quiet. The other board members were watching with sharp interest, and Vincent was observing Michael with an expression that revealed nothing. Michael glanced at his mother, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. "I don't have those specific statistics with me today, but I can provide them after the meeting." Holly pulled a document from her folder and slid it across the table. That won't be necessary. We've already obtained that information through public records requests. Your company's worker injury rate is 300% higher than industry average. 300%. Would you care to explain why? The color drained from Michael's face. Constance stood up abruptly. This is clearly a personal attack, Constance said, her voice sharp. You're using your position to retaliate against my son for a failed marriage. This is unethical and unprofessional. Holly didn't raise her voice, didn't show any emotion. Mrs. Dillon, please sit down. This is a business meeting, and these are legitimate questions about your company's practices. If you can't answer questions about worker safety, perhaps you're not prepared for this presentation. Vincent spoke up, his voice carrying absolute authority. Miss Montgomery is asking questions any responsible investor would ask. The fact that these questions make you uncomfortable suggests they're exactly the questions that need to be asked. Mr. DeLand, please answer the question. Why is your injury rate so much higher than industry standard? Michael looked trapped. Holly could see him calculating, trying to figure out how much they knew, how much he could safely lie about or deflect. Some projects are more dangerous than others, he finally said. We take on challenging jobs that other companies won't touch. That naturally leads to higher risk. Holly pulled out another document. Is that why you consistently use substandard materials that meet minimum legal requirements but fall below industry recommendations? Is that why 3 separate building inspectors have been investigated for accepting bribes to overlook violations on your projects? Well, that's an accusation, Constance snapped. Do you have proof? We have copies of inspection reports that show violations marked as cleared when no corrective work was documented, Holly said, her voice still perfectly calm. We have testimonies from former employees about pressure to cut corners. We have medical records from injured workers whose expenses should have been covered by your workers' compensation insurance, but somehow weren't. She watched the last of Michael's composure crumble. He wasn't looking at her anymore, couldn't meet her eyes. This presentation is over, Constance said, gathering her bag. We'll be filing a complaint about this ambush. This is clearly personal retaliation, and we won't stand for it. By all means, file your complaint, Vincent said coolly. But I should inform you that Montgomery Properties will be issuing a public statement declining your partnership proposal and citing concerns about ethical business practices. We'll also be forwarding the information we've gathered to appropriate regulatory agencies for investigation. Michael finally found his voice, and it came out desperate. Holly, please, can we talk privately? This doesn't have to go this way. Holly stood up, and every eye in the room turned to her. She was calm, composed, absolutely in control. Mr. Deland, my name is Hannah Montgomery. Holly Peters no longer exists. That woman was someone you created, someone small and grateful and desperate for your approval. I'm not her anymore. And this isn't personal, despite what your mother believes. This is about holding powerful people accountable when they abuse that power. This is about justice for workers who were injured because your company prioritized profit over safety. This is about doing the right thing, something you might consider trying sometime. She gathered her documents and looked directly at Michael for the last time. You told me in the hospital that you couldn't stand with me anymore, that I reminded you every day that you'd settled. But the truth is, Michael, I was never the one who settled. You were. You had someone genuine and kind and loyal, and you threw her away because she didn't come with the right pedigree. Now you're seeing what you actually lost. Not a subordinate who made you feel superior, but an equal who could have made you better. She walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. I hope you learn something from this. I hope you become someone who values people over profit. But whether you do or don't, you'll do it without destroying anyone else in the process. Because I'm going to make sure of that. Holly left the boardroom without looking back. She made it to her office and closed the door before her hands started shaking. She'd done it. She'd faced him, confronted him, held him accountable without losing her composure or her dignity. There was a soft knock on her door. Vincent came in, and the pride in his eyes made Holly's throat tight with emotion. "You were magnificent," he said simply. "Professional, composed, powerful. That was not revenge. That was justice." Holly sank into her chair, the adrenaline finally catching up with her. He looked so small. "I spent 3 years terrified of disappointing him, of not being enough for him. And today I looked at him and just saw a man who chose profit over people, comfort over character. He was never worth what I put myself through." "No, he wasn't," Vincent agreed. "But now you know that. Now you'll never question your worth again." Holly thought about Michael's face when he recognized her, about Constance's fury, about the power of speaking truth without apology. She'd been terrified of this confrontation, convinced it would destroy her. Instead, it had freed her completely. Chapter 6, The Aftermath. The press release went out the next morning. Montgomery. Properties announced they were declining partnership with Deland Industries due to concerns about labor practices, worker safety, and ethical business standards. The statement was professionally worded, but devastating in its implications, and it named specific concerns: injury rates, inspection irregularities, worker compensation issues. By noon, 3 major news outlets had picked up the story. By evening, 2 regulatory agencies had announced formal investigations. Holly watched it unfold from her office, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. She'd wanted accountability, but watching a company implode in real time was more intense than she'd anticipated. Tamara called just after 6. "Girl, you're all over the business news. They're calling you the heiress with a conscience, the billionaire who chose justice over profit. You're basically a superhero." Holly laughed, but it came out hollow. "I don't feel like a superhero. I feel like someone who opened Pandora's box and now has to deal with everything that came out." "What you feel like is someone who did the right thing when it was hard," Tamara corrected. "That's the actual definition of courage, not whatever fairy tale version you've got in your head." After they hung up, Holly stared out her office window at the city below. Somewhere out there, Michael was dealing with the destruction of his company's reputation. Somewhere, Constance was probably plotting revenge or trying to use her social connections to make this go away. And somewhere, workers who'd been injured or cheated were probably seeing this news and feeling validated. Maybe for the first time. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You destroyed us. I hope you're proud of yourself." Holly stared at the message, recognizing Michael's tone, even without confirmation it was from him. She started to type a response, then stopped. She had nothing to say to him. He'd made his choices, and now he was living with consequences. That wasn't her responsibility. She blocked the number and put her phone away. Vincent found her an hour later, still sitting in the darkening office. "Go home, Hannah. You've done enough for today. Have I done the right thing?" Holly asked quietly. "I keep thinking about the workers who'll lose their jobs if Deland Industries goes under." "Those people didn't do anything wrong." Vincent sat down across from her. "Those workers would have continued being exploited and endangered if nothing changed. Sometimes destroying something broken is the only way to protect people from it. And for what it's worth, I've already been contacted by 3 construction companies interested in hiring experienced workers if Deland Industries downsizes. The good people will land on their feet." Holly nodded, wanting to believe that. "There's something else you should know," Vincent continued. "We've received calls from 2 other companies reporting similar concerns about business partners. They want advice on how to investigate and address issues like you did. You've started something bigger than just one company's downfall." Holly felt something shift inside her. Maybe this wasn't just about Michael. Maybe this was about using her platform, her position, her voice, to create actual change. Not revenge, but transformation. "I want to create a fund," Holly said suddenly, "for workers who've been injured or underpaid by companies like Deland Industries. Not just their workers, but any company where we find evidence of exploitation. We have the resources to help these people, to make them whole again. Vincent smiled. Consider it done. I'll have our foundation team start working on it tomorrow. That night, Holly returned to the Montgomery estate feeling exhausted but oddly at peace. She'd been terrified that confronting Michael would break her, would prove that she was still the small person he'd convinced her she was. Instead, she discovered she was so much more. Lydia was waiting for her with tea and sympathy. They sat together in the conservatory, surrounded by flowering plants that filled the air with gentle fragrance. Your father told me about the meeting, Lydia said. About how you handled yourself. I wish I could have seen it. It was terrifying, Holly admitted, but also liberating. I spent so long being afraid of him, of what he thought of me. And today I looked at him and felt nothing. No fear, no anger, not even satisfaction, really. Just distance. That's healing, Lydia said softly. That's what it looks like when you've truly moved past someone. Holly sipped her tea, thinking about the woman she'd been and the woman she was becoming. I need to do more, though. It's not enough to just stop bad actors. I want to actively help people who've been hurt. She told Lydia about her idea for the Worker Assistance Fund and watched her mother's face light up with approval and pride. You're building a legacy, Lydia said, not just of wealth or power, but of actually making the world better. That's extraordinary, Hannah. Over the next week, the investigations into Deland Industries accelerated. Federal regulators got involved. Workers came forward with testimonies now that they saw someone powerful was actually listening. The full scope of the company's violations became public knowledge. Holly watched it unfold while simultaneously working on her assistance fund. She hired victim advocates, set up a hotline, created a process for workers to receive emergency financial help while their cases were being investigated, and people called. Not just Deland Industries workers, but people from other companies, other industries, sharing their stories of exploitation and asking for help. Holly had started something she couldn't have anticipated. By standing up to one company, she'd given courage to countless others to speak their truth. One afternoon, a woman named Maria came to Holly's office. She'd been injured on a Deland construction site, suffered a back injury that required surgery, and then been pressured to sign away her right to workers' compensation in exchange for a small settlement that hadn't even covered her medical bills. I saw what you did, Maria said, tears in her eyes. I saw someone powerful actually stand up for people like me, and I thought maybe if you could do that, maybe I could come forward too. Holly helped Maria connect with lawyers who could reopen her case. She made sure Maria's medical bills were covered immediately through the assistance fund. She sat with this stranger and listened to her story, with the same attention Vincent and Lydia had given to Holly's own story. After Maria left, Holly sat in her office feeling the weight and privilege of her position. She'd been given so much, a family, wealth, power, platform, and she had a choice about what to do with all of it. She could use it to insulate herself from the world's problems, to build walls of luxury around her comfort, or she could use it to help people, to create change, to be the kind of person who made the world slightly better by existing in it. The choice felt obvious. That evening, her phone rang. Jennifer Deland, Michael's younger sister, requested to meet with her. Holly was surprised but agreed. They met at a quiet cafe, far from social circles where either might be recognized. Jennifer looked exhausted and anxious. I want to thank you, Jennifer said immediately. I know that sounds crazy, given what you've done to my family's company, but I need you to know that I'm grateful. Holly waited, letting Jennifer find her words. I've known for years that something was wrong with how we did business. I saw the corners we cut, the workers we treated as disposable. I tried to speak up to my mother, to Michael, but they shut me down every time. They said I was too soft, too naive, that this was just how business worked. Jennifer's hands trembled around her coffee cup. You did what I should have done years ago. You held them accountable when I was too afraid to. What will you do now? Holly asked gently. I'm taking over operations, Jennifer said firmly. My mother and brother are stepping back, and I'm going to rebuild this company from the ground up. Fair wages, proper safety protocols, transparency in all our practices. I want to prove that we can be profitable and ethical, that we don't have to choose between profit and treating people right. Holly felt respect for this woman who was choosing the hard path. If you're serious about that, if you actually follow through, I'll help however I can. Resources, advice, connections. The goal was never to destroy your company. It was to force change. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. I'm serious. I have a daughter, and I don't want her to inherit a legacy of exploitation. I want her to be proud of what we build. After Jennifer left, Holly felt something she hadn't expected. Hope, not just for herself, but for the possibility that even broken systems could be repaired by people willing to do the work. She walked back to Montgomery Properties as the sun set, painting the city in gold and shadow. She thought about Michael in that hospital room, telling her he couldn't stand with her. She thought about Constance saying her blood wasn't good enough. They'd been so wrong about her worth. But more importantly, she'd been wrong about it too. She'd believed that her value came from their acceptance, from fitting into their world, from being enough for people who would never see her as equal. Now she knew different. Her worth was inherent, unshakable, independent of anyone's opinion, and that knowledge was worth everything. She'd been through to discover it. Holly Peters had died in that hospital room when she signed the divorce papers. Hannah Montgomery had been born the moment she chose to save a stranger's life despite her own devastation, and the woman she was becoming would spend the rest of her life making sure other people discovered their worth without having to suffer the way she'd suffered to learn it. Chapter 7. The Confession That Changed Everything. 6 weeks after the boardroom confrontation, Holly received a call from the Montgomery estate's head of security. Ms. Montgomery, there's a woman at the gate requesting to see you. Constance Deland. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's urgent and personal. Holly's first instinct was to refuse. She'd said everything she needed to say to Constance in that boardroom. She'd moved on, built a life that didn't include the Delands or their toxicity, but something in the security guard's tone made her pause. How does she seem? Honestly, broken. I've been doing security for 20 years, and I know when someone's putting on an act. This woman looks like she's been through hell, Holly considered. She could turn Constance away, maintain her boundaries, keep her life free of the people who tormented her. That would be the safe choice. But she thought about Maria, about the workers who'd come forward, about Jennifer choosing to rebuild rather than abandon. Maybe healing required more than just revenge. Maybe it required understanding. Give me 30 minutes, then show her to the east sitting room, Holly said, and stay nearby. If I need you to remove her, I'll text you. Holly changed from her work clothes into something more casual, but still put together. She wasn't armor building this time, but she wasn't leaving herself vulnerable either. When she entered the sitting room, she found Constance standing by the windows, looking out at the gardens. The change in Constance was shocking. The woman who'd always been immaculately groomed looked haggard. Her designer clothes hung on a frame that had lost weight. Her hair wasn't styled with its usual perfection, and her makeup couldn't quite hide the shadows under her eyes. Constance turned when she heard Holly enter. Thank you for seeing me. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I would either, Holly said honestly. She didn't invite Constance to sit. This wasn't a social call. What do you want? Constance's hands twisted together, a nervous gesture Holly had never seen from this woman who'd always projected absolute control. I need to tell you something I should have told you 3 years ago, or maybe 30 years before that. Something I should have told myself a long time ago. Holly waited, her expression neutral. I wasn't born Constance Deland, Constance began, her voice barely above a whisper. I was born Constance Miller in a neighborhood where the rats outnumbered the working streetlights. My mother cleaned houses for wealthy families on the Upper East Side, and she'd take me with her sometimes because she couldn't afford childcare. Holly felt her careful composure slip slightly. This wasn't what she'd expected. I was 8 years old the first time I stood in a mansion like this one, Constance continued, still not meeting Holly's eyes. The family was away, and my mother was doing a deep clean. I wandered into the daughter's room, and she had more toys than I'd ever seen. More clothes, more books, more everything. And I stood there in my second-hand shoes that didn't fit right, and I made myself a promise. Constance finally turned to face Holly directly. I promised myself that someday I'd live in a house like that I'd wear clothes like that I'd belong in that world no matter what it took. And I kept that promise. I studied harder than anyone else at my public school. I got a scholarship to college. I learned how to talk, how to dress, how to erase every trace of where I came from. And when I met Michael's father at a charity gala where I was working as a coat check girl, I saw my opportunity, and I took it. Holly sat down now, drawn in despite herself. Why are you telling me this? Because the first time Michael brought you home, the first time I saw you standing in my foyer in your discount store dress with your uncertain smile, I didn't see you, Constance said, and now her voice was breaking. I saw 8-year-old Constance Miller. I saw the girl I'd spent 40 years trying to bury and forget. I saw everything I'd escaped from, everything I was terrified of becoming again. Tears were streaming down Constance's face now, mascara leaving dark trails on her cheeks. And instead of having compassion, instead of seeing you as someone who deserved kindness and support, I panicked. I saw you as a threat to everything I'd built. Every time you struggled with which fork to use, every time you didn't know the right thing to say at a party, every time you looked uncertain, I saw my own past. I saw the possibility that someone might look at you and realize I'd come from the same place. Holly's throat was tight. So you destroyed me to protect yourself? Yes, Constance whispered. I was cruel to you because I was terrified. I turned my son against you because I couldn't face my own history. I made you feel worthless because I still, deep down, felt worthless myself. And I've spent every day since you left knowing I destroyed something real and good because of my own cowardice. She moved closer to Holly, then stopped, as if afraid she didn't have the right to approach. I taught Michael all the wrong things. I taught him that appearances mattered more than character, that wealth determined worth, that people without pedigrees were somehow less than. I turned my son into someone who could throw away a woman like you because I'd spent his whole life teaching him my own twisted values. Constance sat down heavily, as if her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. The investigations, the public scrutiny, watching our company's reputation collapse. It's broken something open in me. Michael blamed you at first. He was furious, wanted to sue you, wanted revenge, but I couldn't join him in that. Because I knew, Holly, I knew you were right about everything. I knew we'd been cutting corners and exploiting people. I knew we'd been exactly what you accused us of being. She looked directly at Holly for the first time with something like desperate honesty in her eyes. So I hired a private investigator. I had them look into everything you'd claimed about our company. And what they found was worse than what you'd presented in that boardroom. We weren't just negligent. We were systematically predatory. We targeted vulnerable workers, immigrants who didn't know their rights, people who were desperate enough to accept terrible conditions. We built our profits on the backs of people who couldn't fight back. Constance's voice dropped to barely audible. We built our profits the same way I'd built my life, by taking advantage of people weaker than us and pretending we'd earned what we had. Holly found her voice, though it came out rough with emotion. Why are you telling me all this? What do you want from me? Nothing, Constance said immediately. I don't want anything except for you to know the truth. To understand that what I did to you wasn't about you at all. It was about me, about my fear, about my self-hatred that I'd never dealt with. You were innocent and kind and genuine, and I punished you for it because those qualities reminded me of everything I'd tried to destroy in myself." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, placing it on the table between them. "This is a letter I've written to the investigators, detailing everything I know about our company's violations. Names, dates, specific incidents. I'm cooperating fully with their investigation. Michael is furious with me, but I don't care anymore. I'm done protecting a system that destroys people." Holly stared at the envelope, her mind reeling. "You're turning on your own son?" "I'm trying to save him before he becomes completely lost to the person I created," Constance corrected. "If he faces real consequences now, maybe he can change. Maybe he can become someone who values people over profit, who treats everyone with dignity regardless of their background. I failed to teach him that. Maybe punishment will succeed where my parenting failed." Constance stood, preparing to leave. "I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I just needed you to know that you were never the problem. You were never not enough. You were always more than enough, and I was too broken and scared to see it. My cruelty to you was the biggest mistake of my life, not because of who you became, but because of who you always were. Someone genuine and kind in a world full of people like me who'd forgotten how to be either of those things." She walked toward the door, then paused with her hand on the doorknob. "You're going to do extraordinary things, Holly. You already are. And someday, when you're very old and very successful and surrounded by people whose lives you've changed, I hope you'll think back on this conversation and know that at least one person you encountered along the way had the grace to admit they were completely wrong about you." After Constance left, Holly sat in the sitting room for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. She'd expected anger, maybe manipulation, possibly attempts at revenge disguised as reconciliation. She hadn't expected vulnerability, confession, or what felt like genuine remorse. Her phone buzzed. Lydia was texting, "Security told me Constance was here. Are you okay?" Holly called her mother back. "I'm not sure. She told me things I wasn't expecting. About her past, about why she treated me the way she did. Are you buying it?" Lydia asked carefully. "Or does it feel like manipulation?" Holly thought about Constance's face, about the way her hands had trembled, about the mascara tracks on her cheeks. "I think it's real. I think she's been broken by everything that's happened. But more than that, I think she's been broken by having to face who she really is underneath all the armor she built." She told Lydia about Constance's childhood, about the promise she'd made, about the life she'd constructed to escape poverty and shame. "That doesn't excuse what she did to you," Lydia said firmly. "Understanding someone's pain doesn't mean accepting their abuse." "I know," Holly agreed. "But it does help me understand. She wasn't rejecting me because I wasn't good enough. She was rejecting the parts of herself she'd never accepted. I was just collateral damage in her war with her own history." That evening, Holly walked through the estate gardens, thinking about everything Constance had said. She thought about the young Constance Miller, standing in someone else's mansion, making promises about who she'd become. She thought about the desperation it must have taken to completely reinvent herself, to bury her origins so completely that even her own son didn't know the truth. And she thought about how that buried shame had poisoned everything Constance touched, how it had turned her into someone cruel and small, despite all her money and status. Holly realized something important. Wealth and status hadn't made Constance powerful. They'd made her a prisoner of her own fear, constantly worried about being exposed, about being sent back to the poverty she'd escaped. Real power, Holly understood now, came from accepting yourself completely, from knowing your worth regardless of circumstances, from being able to stand in any room and feel like you belonged because you belonged to yourself. That was something Constance had never learned. Maybe it was something she still had time to learn, but that wasn't Holly's responsibility. Holly pulled out her phone and texted Jennifer DeLand. "Your mother came to see me today. I think she needs help, real help. Therapy, support, someone to talk to who isn't entangled in family dynamics. If you want recommendations, I can provide them. Jennifer's response came quickly. Thank you. She's been different since everything fell apart. Quieter, more honest. It's scary, but also kind of hopeful. I'll talk to her about therapy. Holly looked up at the mansion, at the windows glowing with warm light, at the home where she'd been loved as a child and loved again as an adult. She thought about all the houses Constance's mother had cleaned, about young Constance promising herself she'd own a place like this someday. And Holly realized the saddest truth. Constance had achieved her dream of living in a beautiful house, marrying into wealth, being accepted in high society. But she'd never achieved peace. She'd never achieved self-acceptance. She'd gotten everything she wanted and discovered it wasn't enough to heal what was broken inside her. Holly wouldn't make that mistake. She had wealth now, status, power, but those things weren't her identity. They were tools she could use to help people, to create change, to build a legacy of compassion rather than cruelty. She thought about Constance's letter to the investigators, about her choice to tell the truth, even at the cost of her own son's freedom. That took courage, the kind of courage that came from hitting bottom and deciding to climb back up with integrity instead of deception. Maybe people could change. Maybe even people who'd been cruel could become honest. Maybe even people who'd spent decades hiding could learn to live in truth. Holly hoped so. Not for Constance's sake specifically, but for the sake of believing that growth was always possible, that no one was beyond redemption if they were willing to do the hard work. She went back inside to find Vincent and Lydia in the study, both looking concerned. I'm okay, Holly said before they could ask. Actually, I'm better than okay. I understand something now that I didn't before. She told them about the conversation, about Constance's confession, about understanding the roots of cruelty. Does this change how you feel about what happened? Vincent asked carefully. Holly considered the question seriously. It doesn't excuse what they did to me, but it helps me see that their treatment of me was never a reflection of my worth. It was always about their own brokenness, and that's freeing. That means I can finally, fully let it go. Lydia pulled Holly into a hug. You're remarkable, you know that? Most people would want to keep hating them, would hold on to the anger, but you're choosing understanding without letting them off the hook for accountability. That's wisdom. Later that night, Holly sat at her desk and wrote in the journal Lydia had given her. She wrote about Constance's visit, about the complexity of human pain, about how hurt people, and how cycles of trauma perpetuate themselves until someone chooses to break them. She wrote, I forgive Constance, not because she deserves it, but because I deserve peace. I forgive Michael for being who his mother taught him to be. I forgive them both for not seeing my worth. And most importantly, I forgive myself for believing them when they said I wasn't enough. She closed the journal and looked out her window at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Constance was probably sitting in her own house, dealing with the destruction of everything she'd built. Somewhere Michael was facing consequences for choices he'd made without fully understanding their impact. And here, in this beautiful room, in this beautiful house, Holly Peters Montgomery was finally completely, absolutely free. Not because her tormentors had apologized or suffered or seen the error of their ways, but because she'd stopped needing them to validate her worth. Because she'd discovered that the only opinion of her that truly mattered was her own. And in her own eyes, finally, she was enough. She'd always been enough. She always would be. Chapter 8. The Trial. 4 months after the boardroom confrontation, Holly received a call from prosecutor Patricia Huang. Ms. Montgomery, we're ready to move forward with criminal charges against Michael DeLand and several key executives at DeLand Industries. I'm calling to ask if you'd be willing to testify about what you observed during your marriage regarding company practices. Holly had known this call was coming. The investigation she'd triggered had uncovered extensive fraud, safety violations, and systematic exploitation of workers. Criminal charges had been inevitable. What would testifying involve? Holly asked. You'd be questioned about conversations you overheard, documents you may have seen, any direct knowledge you have about deliberate corner-cutting or safety violations. Your testimony isn't essential to the case. We have other evidence, but it would strengthen our ability to prove that leadership knew about these practices and chose to ignore them. Holly thought about Maria and the other workers who'd come forward. She thought about the construction worker who still walked with a limp. She thought about the single mother who'd lost everything. I'll testify, Holly said. But I want to be clear. This isn't about revenge against my ex-husband. This is about accountability for harm done to vulnerable workers. Patricia's voice was approving. That's exactly the right perspective. We'll be in touch about preparation and scheduling. 2 weeks later, Holly sat in Patricia's office reviewing her testimony. The prosecutor walked her through the questions she'd be asked, the likely defense strategies, and how to stay focused on facts rather than emotion. Michael's defense will try to paint you as a vindictive ex-wife out for revenge, Patricia warned. They'll try to make this about your marriage instead of about the actual crimes. You need to stay calm and redirect to the facts. Holly practiced her responses, learning to speak clearly and factually about what she'd witnessed. She'd heard Michael and Constance discussing ways to delay payment to contractors. She'd seen documents showing safety equipment purchases that were never delivered. She'd witnessed conversations about finding flexible building inspectors. At the time, she'd been too focused on trying to fit into their world to understand what she was witnessing. Now, with distance and perspective, she could see it clearly. Systematic fraud designed to maximize profit at the expense of worker safety. The trial began on a grey morning in November. Holly arrived at the courthouse with Vincent and Lydia flanking her, a show of family support that the assembled media didn't miss. Cameras flashed as she climbed the courthouse steps. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Workers who'd been injured sat in the gallery, along with journalists, activists, and curious onlookers drawn by the story of the billionaire heiress testifying against her ex-husband. Michael sat at the defense table looking nothing like the confident man who'd walked into that boardroom presentation. He was thinner, his expensive suit hanging loose on his frame. When Holly entered, he looked up and their eyes met for a brief moment. She saw something in his face that looked like regret, but it was too late for regret. Holly was called to testify on the third day of the trial. She walked to the witness stand with her spine straight, her voice steady as she swore to tell the truth. Patricia led her through the preliminary questions, establishing her identity and relationship to the defendant. Then they moved into the substance of her testimony. Miss Montgomery, during your marriage to the defendant, did you ever hear conversations about construction safety? Holly kept her eyes on Patricia, not looking at Michael. Yes, I heard Michael and his mother discussing safety equipment requirements on several occasions. They talked about finding the minimum acceptable grade of equipment rather than industry standard quality. Can you describe a specific conversation you remember? Holly thought back. In the spring before our divorce, I overheard Michael on the phone in his home office. He was talking to someone about harnesses for workers on a high-rise project. He said, and I remember this exactly, we don't need the premium grade. Find something that meets code but costs half as much. Nobody checks this stuff anyway. A murmur went through the courtroom. Michael's lawyer, Bernard Whitfield, was already on his feet. Objection. Your Honor, this is hearsay. Ms. Montgomery is testifying about a phone conversation she only heard one side of. The judge considered. I'll allow it as testimony about what the witness heard directly from the defendant, though the jury should consider the limitations of hearing only one side of the conversation. Proceed. Patricia continued. Did you ever see documents related to safety inspections? Yes. Michael kept files at home, and I saw several inspection reports that had violations marked as cleared. But I'd heard him tell his operations manager that they hadn't actually fixed the issues, just paid the inspector to mark them as resolved. This time, Whitfield didn't object. He knew that objection would only emphasize the testimony. Patricia walked Holly through several more incidents, each one painting a picture of systematic disregard for safety and legal requirements. Holly remained calm and factual, never editorializing, never injecting emotion into her account. Then it was Whitfield's turn for cross-examination. He stood slowly, arranging his papers with deliberate care, trying to throw Holly off balance with the pause. "Ms. Montgomery, isn't it true that you and my client had a contentious divorce?" "We had a divorce," Holly said evenly. "I wouldn't characterize it as contentious." "He filed, I signed, it was resolved. But you were upset about the divorce, weren't you? You felt rejected, abandoned." "I was hurt at the time, yes," Whitfield pounced. "Hurt enough to want revenge? Hurt enough to fabricate testimony that would destroy the man who rejected you?" Holly met his eyes steadily. "I'm not fabricating anything. I'm reporting conversations and events I witnessed. And I'm not testifying because I want revenge. I'm testifying because workers were injured due to negligence, and I have information relevant to understanding how that negligence occurred." "Convenient that you suddenly remember all these incriminating conversations now, months after your divorce, when it serves your interests." "I'm not suddenly remembering them," Holly corrected. "I've provided the prosecutor with journals and notes from the time period, documenting things I witnessed. Those contemporaneous records support everything I'm testifying to today." Whitfield looked surprised. He clearly hadn't expected that. "You kept journals during your marriage?" "I did. I was seeing a therapist at the time because I was struggling with feeling inadequate in Michael's world. My therapist suggested I keep a journal. Those journals include entries about things I witnessed that made me uncomfortable, but that I didn't understand fully at the time." Patricia was smiling slightly. They'd prepared this carefully, knowing the defense would attack Holly's credibility. Whitfield tried another angle. "Ms. Montgomery, isn't it true that you now stand to benefit professionally from Deland Industries' downfall? That Montgomery Properties has gained contracts that would have gone to my client's company?" "Montgomery Properties has gained no contracts that were pending to Deland Industries," Holly said clearly. "We've gained contracts based on our reputation for ethical practices and quality work. And personally, I've gained nothing from your client's legal troubles, except the knowledge that workers are safer now because these practices have been exposed. But you've certainly gained status and media attention from your role in these investigations. You've gone from nobody to somebody by destroying your ex-husband." Holly felt a flash of anger, but kept it out of her voice. "I was never nobody, Mr. Whitfield. I was a person with inherent worth who happened to be in a marriage to someone who couldn't see that worth. And I didn't destroy your client. His own choices, his own practices, his own decisions to prioritize profit over people destroyed him. I just made sure the truth came to light." The gallery erupted in applause, and the judge had to gavel for order. Whitfield looked flustered, realizing he'd given Holly the perfect opportunity to make her point. He tried a few more questions, but couldn't shake Holly's testimony. She remained calm, consistent, and focused on facts rather than emotion. When he finally dismissed her, Holly stepped down from the witness stand, feeling drained but satisfied. She'd told the truth. She'd honored the workers who'd been hurt, and she'd done it with dignity and composure. The trial continued for another week. Other witnesses testified about safety violations, unpaid wages, falsified reports. The evidence was overwhelming. Holly didn't attend every day of the trial. She had work to do at Montgomery Properties and with her Worker Assistance Fund. But she was there for closing arguments, sitting in the gallery with Vincent and Lydia. Patricia's closing was powerful, painting a picture of systematic exploitation and deliberate disregard for human safety. She emphasized that this wasn't about mistakes or accidents. This was about choices to value profit over people, choices that had real consequences for real families. Whitfield's closing tried to paint Michael as a young businessman who trusted the wrong advisors, who'd inherited problems rather than created them. It rang hollow against the weight of evidence. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, When they returned, the verdict was read: guilty on multiple counts, including fraud, safety violations, and conspiracy to defraud workers. Michael showed no emotion as the verdict was read. He simply stared straight ahead, his face blank. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. As Holly left the courthouse, she was swarmed by reporters shouting questions. "Miss Montgomery, how do you feel about the verdict?" Holly stopped and faced the cameras. "I'm grateful that the jury saw through the defense's attempts to make this about personal grievances. This was about accountability for harm done to workers. Justice was served today, not for me, but for every person who was injured or exploited. I hope this sends a message that workers matter, that their safety matters, that we won't tolerate companies treating people as disposable." That evening, Tamara came over with takeout and wine. They sat on Holly's penthouse balcony, looking out at the city lights. "You were incredible on that stand," Tamara said. "I watched the clips online. You didn't let that lawyer rattle you even once." Holly sipped her wine. "I just kept thinking about Maria and the other workers. This wasn't about me and Michael. It was about making sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. But also," Tamara added gently, "it was about showing him who you really are. The woman he threw away is the woman who brought him to justice." "That's poetic." Holly considered that. "Maybe, but honestly, I've stopped caring what he thinks of me. The only opinion that matters is my own, and I'm proud of who I'm becoming." 2 weeks later, Michael was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. It wasn't the maximum possible sentence, but it was substantial. As he was led away, he looked back once at the gallery. His eyes found Holly, and she saw something in his face: acceptance, maybe even understanding. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just nodded slightly, acknowledging the moment, then turned and walked out of the courthouse for the last time. That chapter of her life was finally, truly closed. Chapter 9. The Woman She's Becoming. 6 months after the trial, Holly attended a charity gala for foster youth advocacy. She'd been working tirelessly on her assistance fund, which had grown beyond just helping workers. She'd expanded it to support foster children transitioning to adulthood, providing college scholarships, job training, and mentorship programs. Tonight's gala was a celebration of the program's first year, showcasing success stories of former foster youth who'd gone to college, started careers, built lives for themselves with support they wouldn't have had otherwise. Holly wore a midnight blue gown that Lydia had helped her choose, elegant and understated. She'd learned to move in these spaces with confidence now, no longer the uncertain woman trying to prove she belonged. She simply belonged because she decided she did. "Miss Montgomery." Holly turned to find a young woman approaching, tears already streaming down her face. "My name is Jasmine. I was in foster care until I aged out last year. I had nothing, no family, no money, no plan. I applied to your scholarship program, not really believing I'd get it. But I did, and now I'm in nursing school. I'm going to be a nurse because of you." Holly felt her throat tighten. "Not because of me, because of you. Because you were brave enough to apply, strong enough to survive a difficult childhood, and determined enough to build a future. I just helped remove some obstacles." Jasmine hugged her tightly. "You don't understand. You saved my life. Not dramatically, not obviously, but you saved it. I was about to give up, about to decide that people like me don't get happy endings. And then you showed me that we do, that we can." After Jasmine moved on to talk with other guests, Holly stood alone for a moment, letting the weight of that encounter settle in her chest. This was why she did the work, not for recognition or praise, but for these moments when she could see the direct impact of choosing to help rather than just protect her own comfort. The reaction you inspired there." Holly turned, to find a tall man standing nearby, watching her with interest. He was around her age, handsome in an understated way, wearing his tuxedo like he was actually comfortable in it. She inspired it herself by having the courage to ask for help, Holly said. The man smiled. "Cameron Winters. I'm a trauma surgeon at Mount Sinai, and I volunteer with your medical support program for foster youth." Holly recognized the name. "You're the doctor who's been providing free health screenings. I've wanted to thank you for that. I've wanted to meet you too. What you're building with this program is remarkable. I see kids all the time in the ER who age out of foster care and have no idea how to navigate healthcare, how to advocate for themselves. Your program is changing that." They talked for over an hour, and Holly was surprised by how easy the conversation felt. Cameron was intelligent and passionate about his work, but also funny and self-deprecating. He treated her like a person, not like a famous heiress or a cautionary tale about bad marriages. "Would you like to have coffee sometime?" Cameron asked as the gala was winding down. "To discuss potentially expanding the medical program, and maybe also just because I'd like to get to know you better." Holly hesitated. She hadn't dated anyone since Michael, hadn't even considered it. The idea of opening herself up to potential hurt again was terrifying. But then she thought about everything she'd learned over the past year, about how staying safe meant staying small, about how growth required risk, about how she couldn't let fear of pain prevent her from experiencing joy. "I'd like that," Holly said, and meant it. They exchanged numbers. And as Holly left the gala, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope about the future, specifically about her personal future rather than just her professional accomplishments. Over the next few months, Holly and Cameron saw each other regularly. Coffee dates turned into dinner dates. Dinner dates turned into long walks through the city, talking about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Cameron knew about Holly's past, everyone did. But he never treated her like she was broken or needed fixing. He treated her like she was exactly what she was, strong, capable, still healing, still growing. "You know what I admire most about you?" Cameron said one evening as they walked through Central Park. "What?" "You took the worst experience of your life and turned it into purpose. You could have spent the rest of your life angry or bitter. Instead, you built programs that help people. You turned your pain into something that eases other people's pain." Holly thought about that. "I don't know if I'd say I turned it into purpose. I think the purpose was always there. I just needed the resources and confidence to act on it. Michael and Constance taking me down to nothing helped me understand what it feels like to be powerless. And now that I have power, I won't waste it." 6 months into their relationship, Cameron met Holly's parents officially. Vincent and Lydia had been cautiously supportive of Holly dating again, protective of their daughter, who'd been hurt so badly. But dinner at the Montgomery estate went beautifully. Cameron was genuine and respectful, clearly in awe of the family's accomplishments, but not intimidated by their wealth. He talked about his work with the same passion Holly had when discussing her programs, and Vincent and Lydia recognized a kindred spirit. "He's good for you," Lydia told Holly later that night. "He sees you for exactly who you are and loves that person." Holly realized her mother was right. Cameron didn't love her despite her past or because of her present success. He loved her because of who she fundamentally was as a person, her values, her compassion, her strength, her vulnerability. One evening, nearly a year after they'd met, Cameron took Holly to the rooftop of his apartment building. The city sprawled below them. Millions of lights representing millions of lives, millions of stories. "I need to tell you something," Cameron said, taking her hands. Holly's heart raced, hoping and fearing in equal measure. "I'm in love with you," Cameron said simply. "Not with Holly the heiress or Hannah the lost daughter who came home. Not with the woman who brought down a corrupt company or the philanthropist changing lives. I'm in love with you. The person who still gets nervous before public speaking, but does it anyway. The person who cries during commercials with dogs. The person who's building something beautiful out of something broken." Holly felt tears on her cheeks. "I'm in love with you too, and I'm terrified of that because the last time I loved someone, he destroyed me." "I know," Cameron said gently, "and I can't promise I'll never hurt you. Humans hurt each other sometimes even when they're trying not to, but I can promise I'll never make you feel less than you are. I'll never ask you to be smaller so I can feel bigger. I'll never treat your love like it's something I'm settling for." "That's all I need," Holly whispered. "That's everything." They stood on that rooftop as the sun set over the city, and Holly felt something settle inside her. She'd spent so long looking for validation from others, trying to prove she was worthy of love. Now she knew she'd always been worthy. The question was never whether she deserved love. The question was whether the person offering it deserved her, and Cameron did. He saw her clearly and loved what he saw. He challenged her to grow and supported her when she struggled. He made her laugh and held her when she cried. He was everything Michael had never been: genuine, kind, secure enough in himself that he didn't need to diminish her to feel important. That night, Holly called Tamara to share the news. "He told me he loves me," Holly said, unable to keep the joy out of her voice. "And you said it back?" Tamara asked. "I did. And Tamara, it feels completely different than it did with Michael. It feels stable and real and safe. That's because it is real, girl. You found someone who actually deserves you, finally." As Holly ended the call and got ready for bed, she thought about the journey she'd taken. From the devastated woman in that hospital room to the confident CEO and philanthropist she'd become. From someone who believed her worth depended on other people's approval, to someone who knew her value was inherent and unshakable. She'd lost everything once, and it had freed her to discover who she really was beneath all the expectations and assumptions, and who she really was turned out to be pretty extraordinary. Chapter 10. The Woman Who Chose Herself. 2 years after signing divorce papers in a hospital room, Holly stood in a completely different hospital, this time holding her newborn daughter. Grace Elizabeth Montgomery Winters had been born just hours ago, and Holly couldn't stop staring at her tiny, perfect face. Cameron sat beside the hospital bed, his arm around Holly's shoulders, both of them overwhelmed by the reality of this new life they'd created. Lydia and Vincent arrived within the hour, bringing flowers and tears of joy. Lydia held her granddaughter with shaking hands, crying openly at the miracle of it. "I never thought I'd get to do this," Lydia whispered. "I thought that chance was stolen from me forever." Holly watched her mother with Grace and felt the circle of her story completing. She'd been the lost daughter who came home, and now she'd given her parents the joy of being grandparents, something they'd been denied for 3 decades. Over the next months, Holly learned to balance being a mother with being a CEO and philanthropist. It wasn't easy. The sleepless nights and constant demands stretched her in ways she hadn't anticipated. But Cameron was an equal partner, taking paternity leave and splitting responsibilities without having to be asked. On Grace's first birthday, Holly organized a small party at the Montgomery estate. Just family and close friends, nothing extravagant. As she watched her daughter take tentative steps across the lawn, Holly felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jennifer Deland. "Thinking about you today. Wanted you to know that Michael was released early for good behavior. He's working construction now, actually doing the physical labor instead of managing from a distance. He's different, quieter. I think prison changed him. Anyway, I thought you should know." Holly read the message and felt nothing except mild curiosity. Michael was part of her past, a chapter that had closed completely. She hoped he was becoming a better person, but it was no longer her concern. She texted back, "Thank you for letting me know. I genuinely hope he's finding peace." Later that evening, after Grace was asleep and the guests had left, Holly stood on the terrace with Cameron, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "What are you thinking about?" Cameron asked, pulling her close. "About how the worst day of my life led to the best life I could imagine," Holly said. "About how being rejected freed me to discover who I really was. About how losing everything helped me understand what actually matters." She thought about the woman she'd been, desperate for Michael's approval, believing she was nothing without his validation. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone Holly barely recognized. "You know what I finally understand," Holly continued. "My worth was never the question. I was always valuable, always worthy, always enough. The only thing that changed was my understanding of myself. Michael didn't give me worth by marrying me, and he didn't take it away by divorcing me. It was always mine." Cameron kissed the top of her head. "That's the most important thing anyone can learn, that they don't need permission to be valuable." Holly looked out at the city, thinking about all the people out there searching for their own worth, believing they needed someone else to validate their existence. She thought about the foster youth in her programs, learning that they mattered regardless of where they came from. She thought about the workers who'd found courage to speak up after seeing her do the same. She thought about the ripple effects of choosing to stand up for yourself and others. "I want to write a book," Holly said suddenly, "about this journey, not as a memoir exactly, but as a guide for people who think they're not enough. I want to tell them what I wish someone had told me. You don't need anyone's permission to know your worth." Cameron smiled. "I think that's a perfect next project." Over the next year, Holly worked on her book while continuing her work with Montgomery Properties and her foundation. She wrote about foster care, about her marriage, about discovery and revenge, and ultimately about choosing healing over bitterness. The book was published to significant acclaim, becoming a bestseller and launching Holly into even greater prominence as an advocate for self-worth and worker rights. She did speaking tours, appeared on podcasts and television shows, always emphasizing the same message: your value is inherent, not earned or granted by others. One day, a package arrived at her office. Inside was a letter from Michael, the first direct communication she'd had from him since the trial. "Holly," it began, and she noted he hadn't called her Hannah or Ms. Montgomery. "I won't pretend I have any right to write to you. I don't, but I read your book, and I need you to know that it changed something in me. You wrote about how I made you feel worthless, and seeing that in print, understanding the full impact of what I did, broke something open. I've been in therapy for 2 years, working on understanding why I treated people the way I did. I'm learning that I was never confident the way I appeared. I was terrified of not measuring up to my family's expectations, so I made myself feel bigger by making others feel smaller. That's no excuse, just an explanation. You deserved so much better than how I treated you. You always did. I'm genuinely happy that you've built such an extraordinary life. You're making the world better, and I'm trying to do the same in my small way. I don't expect forgiveness or a response. I just needed you to know that you succeeded in what you set out to do. You held me accountable, and it saved me from becoming irredeemable. Thank you for that. Michael." Holly read the letter twice, then filed it away. She wouldn't respond. There was nothing left to say between them. But she felt something like peace, knowing that accountability had led to genuine change rather than just punishment. On Grace's 3rd birthday, Holly stood in the same park where she'd been kidnapped 30 years earlier. Vincent and Lydia had brought her here, wanting to reclaim this space with happy memories instead of leaving it as a site of trauma. Grace ran through the grass with other children, laughing and carefree, supervised by Cameron. Holly watched her daughter and felt the weight of generations lifting. "I used to be terrified of this place," Lydia said quietly, standing beside Holly. "I couldn't come here for 28 years, but watching Grace play here, seeing her happy and safe and loved, it changes things. It heals something." "You never gave up," Holly said, taking her mother's hand. "You could have stopped searching, accepted that I was gone, but you never did." "Of course we didn't," Vincent said from her other side. "You were ours. You always were. We just needed to find you." Holly thought about belonging, about how she'd spent so many years feeling lost and alone. She'd been searching for home in all the wrong places, trying to find it in Michael's approval, in social acceptance, in external validation. But home had been waiting for her all along. Home was here, with parents who never stopped loving her. Home was with Cameron, who saw and valued every part of her. Home was with Tamara, who'd been her friend when she had nothing to offer in return. Most importantly, home was within herself. It was knowing that she belonged to herself first, that her worth wasn't dependent on anyone else's recognition of it. That evening, as Holly tucked Grace into bed, her daughter asked a question. "Mama, why do you help so many people?" Holly thought about how to explain it in terms a 3-year-old could understand. "Because I know what it feels like to think you don't matter, and I want to make sure everyone knows they do matter, that they're important just because they exist." "Do I matter?" Grace asked. "You matter more than anything in the world," Holly said, hugging her daughter close. "And you'll always matter, no matter what happens, no matter what anyone says. Your worth is yours, and nobody can ever take it away." Grace smiled and snuggled closer. "I love you, Mama." "I love you too, baby." After Grace fell asleep, Holly stood at her window, looking out at the city she'd once felt so intimidated by. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, about all the pain and growth and transformation. She thought about the blood she'd donated that terrible day, about how that simple act of compassion had changed everything. It had saved. Lydia's life revealed Holly's identity and set in motion a chain of events that had transformed her from someone powerless into someone powerful. But the real transformation had been internal. She'd learned that power wasn't about money or status or position. Real power was knowing your worth and living accordingly. Real power was choosing compassion over cruelty, justice over revenge, healing over bitterness. Real power was choosing yourself, fully and without apology. Holly Peters had died in that hospital room when she signed those divorce papers. Hannah Montgomery had been born when she discovered her true identity, but the woman she'd become was something more than either of those names could capture. She was someone who'd been broken and had chosen to heal, someone who'd been powerless and had chosen to use power responsibly, someone who'd been told she was worthless and had proven that worth was never determined by others' opinions. She was someone who'd chosen herself, completely and absolutely. And in doing so, she'd discovered that the greatest revenge wasn't destroying those who hurt you. It was becoming so completely yourself, so genuinely happy, so purposefully engaged in meaningful work that their opinions became irrelevant background noise. Holly Montgomery Winters smiled at her reflection in the window, seeing clearly for the first time the woman she'd always been meant to become. Strong, compassionate, powerful, free. Enough. Always enough. The end.